I'd like to give a word of thanks to Bill Derby. I want to make sure I don't forget that. Bill has put this program together for a number of years, and he always tries to come up with something different for the message time. In the past, as you remember, we've had our own members give sermons. I've done that once. That's certainly forgettable. Toby's given good ones. Marty did a great one last year. We've had guest speakers. Our problem seems to be that we do this while conference is going on now, and so our guest speakers, many of them are in Roanoke at the time. So we turned inside again, and Bill asked two of us to give some memories of our father, and Ron will be following me. We just want to tell you a little bit about our inspirations. To introduce my father, I'd just like to say that I was lucky, and he would tell me, no, we don't talk about lucky, you were blessed. But my dad was a great man. He, a little bit bio, he was born on Christmas Day, 1913 in Lorain, Ohio, and then his family moved to Carlisle, Pennsylvania, into the house that he grew up in, and that's where I grew up. He went to Dickinson College there in Carlisle, and while there he met my mother. He spent his last 2 years at Lehigh University and got his degree in mechanical engineering. They married in 1940, just before World War II, and moved to Schenectady, New York, where he was an engineer for General Electric and their big plant up there. He was never a military person. During World War II, I guess it was the equivalent of the deferment or something, but he was working at General Electric, designing turbines for the equipment and the things we were using. And I was always very proud of that he used his education and his brain to work there through the war. When I was born up there, and when I was about 3, he moved the family back to Carlisle, again back into the house that he had grown up in. He had a number of jobs in local companies. He's the kind of person that wanted to stay behind the scenes and just support the leaders that were there. By the time he retired at 67, he was we always laugh, the special assistant to the president of a growing company that made electrical connectors. And he kind of did what I would guess is like a chief of staff. He organized plant managers' conferences and was responsible for their annual report, and just supported them and supported the president anytime he could. He retired in, I think, he retired at, I don't know the year, age 67, I believe it was. When he retired, they gave him it wasn't quite a gold watch, but it's a Hamilton watch in appreciation. And I wear that on Sundays. He gave that to me before he passed away. And I wear that proudly on Sundays so that I don't damage it during the week. And it's a good reminder of him. Once he retired, just like many of the men here, it seemed like he got even busier. And he was on a number of civic organizations, school authority, boards of directors of some different agencies. And I believe it was like 2 terms, he was elected to the borough council. And while he was there, he was, again, the quiet facilitator, and people would come to him for his wisdom and his experience. And he passed away December 14th, 2004, just short of his 91st birthday. To talk about his personality, I mentioned it a couple times. Quiet man, didn't really want to take the spotlight, but was known for his wise counsel, and a lot of people sought that out. He never yelled. He sort of didn't raise his voice at all. Certainly never struck anyone, never cursed, never lied. He taught us children to respect everyone and all kinds of people. And he did pass on to me a love of aviation, although he was never a pilot. He loved airplanes, and he would take us, I was telling Lisa, Sunday afternoons we'd get in the car and go to an airport and watch airplanes, which you could do back then. There were actually observation decks, and they encouraged that. and unfortunately these days you can't really do that. But that's where I think I got my interest in and ended up in aviation. When I say that I'm very sure he never lied, and that's a big statement for all those years. I remember one story when I was 6 or 7. We had gone back to Schenectady to visit people, and he took me to the train station, and we had to go upstairs to a second level where the trains were, and I guess there's probably a sign that said passengers only or something, and he said, "Well, I want to get you up there. If we have to, we'll tell a little white lie that we're getting on a train." And that stuck with me for all these years because that's the only time he ever said or alluded to maybe saying something that wasn't fully true. And luckily, he never had to say that. But he's probably the most honest man I've ever known. Spiritually, kind of hard to explain. In the 50s and 60s when I grew up, we didn't talk about our spirituality a whole lot. He was a great example. Always, he went to church, and our family, always went to church. He was a choir member and participated in things at the church. Again, just as a great example. He did another picture I have of him. Every evening, he would be on his knees in prayer beside his bed before he went to bed, and that's something I think is kind of rare, maybe these days or back then. It got to be a little bit of a family joke that he would sometimes fall asleep there, and I kind of wondered how you could spend a half hour or more in prayer, but I know he faithfully did that, I'm sure for the last half of his life or more that I knew him. He, in his later years, especially after my mother passed away, he did get into Bible reading, and every Lent, this is kind of the engineer in him, he'd look at the number of pages in the Bible, and he'd divide it by 46, I think, is the number of days in Lent, with 40 days plus Sundays. And he would read that section every day so that he'd read the whole way through the Bible during Lent. And that's a lot of pages, I can tell you. But he took that on faithfully for definitely the last few years of his life. I got a few traits from him. I'm happy to say a few good ones, I think. Unfortunately, I didn't get all those, and I feel like I can't really stand up to what he was, but he was a great example for me and a number of people. And I'd like to just close with that, and you'll hear this a lot today, to honor your father while he's alive, and that is so true. I wish now that I had talked with him more. Now I have so many questions. Just when I did that little bit of a bio, I have questions about what was it like during the wartime when you were working there, and it's just fascinating what the country at war was like. What led him to do his education as he did, and to move our family several times. I was blessed, truly, to have him as an example for the 52 years of my life that I knew him. So thanks. I'll turn it over to Ron.
Well, good morning. It's great to see everyone here, and once again, happy Father's Day to all the fathers. You all here don't know how blessed you are. Monday, not only do you get to enjoy a doubleheader baseball game, but today you're getting a doubleheader sermon. So, all right. A number of months ago, as Bill Derby was planning this program, again, he asked Alan and I if we'd just say a few words about our fathers and what they meant to us growing up. Well, he told Alan that he had 10 minutes to basically talk about his father, but then he turned to me and winked and said, "Yeah, but Ron, you've got an hour to talk about your dad." So I think I can probably get through everything in about 30 minutes, and I promise we'll get you out of here before lunch, okay? So, all right. Well, just so we know who it is we're talking about, those are my parents. That's a pretty recent photo. It was just taken 2 Sundays ago when my parents were celebrating their 64th wedding anniversary. So, yeah. In September, my mother, Ruth, will celebrate her 90th birthday, And then in November on Veterans Day, Dad will celebrate his 92nd birthday. So they're doing pretty well. It's really hard to talk just about my father because ever since I was born and grew up, it's always been Mom and Dad. Both of them are very active, of course, in taking care of all of us kids. So it's really hard to talk just about Dad. But mothers had their day last month, so today we'll concentrate just on fathers, okay? So why is it that we have a dedicated Father's Day? We don't have a Son's Day, we don't have a Brother's Day or an Uncle's Day. Why do we have a Father's Day? Well, sadly enough, it seems that we were only an afterthought after President Woodrow Wilson approved a resolution in 1914 that made the second Sunday in May a holiday in honor of that tender, gentle army, the mothers of America. This was seen as more of a commercial holiday rather than a national holiday. And attempts were made to institute a Father's Day, but many men continued to disdain the whole idea. One historian writes, "They scoffed at the holiday's sentimental attempts to domesticate manliness with flowers and gift-giving, and they derided the proliferation of such holidays as a commercial gimmick to sell more products, often paid for by the father himself." Okay? When World War II began, advertisers began to argue that celebrating Father's Day was a way to honor troops and to support the war effort. By the end of the World War II, Father's Day had been a federal holiday and it was a national institution. However, it wasn't until 1972, in the middle of a hard-fought presidential re-election campaign, that Richard Nixon signed a proclamation making Father's Day a federal holiday at last, 58 years after the official recognition of Mother's Day. So there you have it. We now have a Father's Day to celebrate in June. So, on this day in June, we're recognizing fathers. We're not just recognizing men or husbands, but fathers, that unique category of men who chose to have and raise children. Because dads are very important in the life of their young children, especially young boys. They are the ones who teach them the very important things in life and the issues that they will face as they're growing up, like how to fish, how to hunt. What is the best and only football team to cheer for? And of course, how to put projects together without reading the instructions. No, actually, my dad didn't hunt or fish, and growing up in Japan, I learned more about sumo wrestling than football. But it all began in June of 1952 when Dad married my mother, and he entered the Lutheran Seminary in St. Paul, Minnesota. Shortly after that, in May of 1954, my twin sisters, Barbara and Beverly, were born. Soon after that, Dad was ordained at the Lutheran Church Annual Conference in St. Paul, and 6 weeks later, the four of them were in Japan. Dad spent the first 2 years at language school in Tokyo, and in October of '55, that's when my twin brother Richard and I were born. Shortly after that, the four of us in tow and all the children under the age of 2 and all of us in diapers, Dad went to his first church in Fuji. Now, many years later, after we had left Japan and I was entering the Naval Academy, little did I know that Dad's time there at the Fuji church was going to become one of my life's lessons. By the time Richard and I graduated from high school, Mom and Dad had already been supporting 2 girls in college, so we both knew that if we were going to go to college, we were going to have to figure out how to get that funded ourselves. So Richard applied for and received a 4-year ROTC scholarship and went out to the University of Washington in Seattle. I picked up an appointment to the Naval Academy and I headed east to Annapolis, Maryland. Through all the research and the brochures at the Academy, it seemed to me like I was going to an East Coast Ivy League school. That's just what I was looking for without the expense of a real Ivy League school. So on July 6th of 1974, I began my indoctrination at the Naval Academy and quickly learned that that place was less like an Ivy League school and more like a military boot camp. I was now beginning plebe summer, and this was my 3 months indoctrination, into personal humiliation, sheer physical exhaustion, and East Coast heat and humidity. At the end of our plebe summer, the Academy had a parents' weekend where your parents could come out and visit their new midshipmen and take a look around the grounds at the Academy. Mom and Dad came out to see me, and it didn't take long before I let them know that this was not what I thought this school was, and this was not where I wanted to be. That's when Dad told me about his time at the Fuji Church. My dad was the second pastor to be appointed at the Fuji Church, and he arrived there after the first pastor had a falling out with his Japanese assistant pastor. Well, the Japanese pastor left the church and promptly took the entire congregation with him. So when my dad got there, there was no congregation. But determined to spread the word of God to the Japanese, Dad prepared a sermon every Sunday, and when he started preaching, one little old lady came to church and sat in the very back pew. And she sat by herself. Then when the service ended, she would get up and leave the church before Dad got a chance to get back to the narthex to introduce himself to her and find out what her name was. Well, that went on for an entire year. Dad would prepare a sermon, preach to the one little old lady every Sunday for an entire year. Dad started to get a little exasperated about this situation, but little did he know that after the Sunday service, this little old lady would go home, talk to her family and friends in the community, and explain to them what this foreign Christian pastor was preaching. After a year of preaching to only one person, more Japanese started coming to church with the little old lady. It turned out that the Japanese in the community wanted to know that this foreign pastor was truly dedicated to teaching this new religion and that he had the perseverance to stick with it. When we finally left Fuji 2 years later, he had a congregation of about 200 people. My dad told me then that if I wanted to, I could quit the academy, but he said that through perseverance and faith in the Lord, I'd be able to get through that first tough year and that things would get better. I thought about what he said and decided to give it a chance. That chance turned into a 21-and-a-half-year career with the Navy. I learned from Dad's example that when you decide to do something, believe in it. Stick with it through the ups and downs, and with perseverance and the Lord's help, you can get through anything. Another of life's experience from Dad came to me and my brother when we were probably about 8 years old and living in Shizuoka, Japan. One summer day, the two of us went out for a bike ride through the hills of the city. It wasn't long before we came across a Shinto cemetery. Once we saw the cemetery, we stopped, we took a look at it, and it didn't take us long to rationalize that we were there to spread the word of God, and that this heathen cemetery was an idolatry. So, Richard and I promptly started turning over headstones, smashed the flower vases, threw the flowers all over the cemetery. We then took off on our bikes, fearing that we'd done a good day's work destroying a heathen cemetery. That night, there was a knock on the door, and a Shinto priest explained to my father that the villagers had seen two young white foreign boys leaving on their bikes from the cemetery that afternoon. My dad profusely apologized to the priest and promised to repay all of the damages. Later that night, after our extensive spankings, Dad sat us down and explained that what we had done did not in any way help his mission of spreading the word of God to the Japanese people. Dad then took the time to explain the differences in our religions and the difference in ours and the Japanese cultures. And he explained that it was only through love and acceptance that we were going to be able to share the word and spread the word of God. That was the start of my first learning of acceptance of others and the tolerance of different ideas and others' beliefs. As I look back at my formative years living with the family, there were always teaching moments, and it seems that my dad rarely missed the opportunity to teach all of us kids these important values of life. There are many more stories that I could tell you about my father and how he positively influenced my life and ultimately made me the man that I am today. But I did promise that I'd get you out of here before lunch. I will always remember him as a kind and gentle man who heard God's calling to spread the word to the unenlightened. And now, as I enjoy my grandchildren, I only hope that I can be as great a teacher of life to them as he was to me. Thank you.